Greetings everyone, my name is Etterville, and welcome back to my Let's Play of A Valley Without Wind. In the last part, I explored a grasslands area north of the settlement, rescued a survivor, and got some new Guardian Power Scrolls. In this part, it's time to finally make a stand against the final lieutenants and clear the southern part of this continent's windstorm regions. In this part, I'm reviewing my settlement status, survivors, and over here is the continent events. These keep track of all the events that happen on this particular continent. Missions completed, survivors rescued, lieutenants felled, etc, etc. So that's pretty nice if you want to see how far you've progressed. But with that out of the way, it's time to clear up more of the southern continent and place enough wind shelters. In this case, I'm placing a wind shelter in this Ice Age Plains region, which is about the same as the first time I did it. Now, depending on the location of where you place it, you'll get a different area you'll have to explore or fight through. The areas that you'll be going through are semi-random, but they're also kind of based on what the main environment is. The Ice Age Plains is relatively plain with a lot of ice-type enemies and whatnot, provided no enemies have migrated outwards. But as I have defeated 2 evil lieutenants, enemies should have started to migrate outwards now. But right now, we have the same usual Skelebots as we saw before, with the addition of the golden Skelebots, of course. So they're not too much of a problem to dispatch. And just like that, we've reached the end of this one. Now time to make a push to the east. I'm placing a wind shelter here so I can get close enough to the next evil lieutenant as well as the evil overlord. In this case, I'm placing it at the Craggy Highlands. Now, I won't be exploring the Craggy Highlands to high detail on this continent, but I will be doing it in the future. The Craggy Highlands is basically a semi-mountainous plains region with a lot of trees, plants, and whatnot. But because of it, the landscape is quite mixed of sorts. And it has a lot of Earth-type enemies as well, like this Highlands Lights, the bats. The Highlands Lights is kind of annoying, or as I like to call them, the Highlands Espers, as they basically do the launch rock spell, but are a lot more powerful. They launch 6 or 7 boulders up into the sky, which will then fall down, and they do quite a bit of damage on impact. Also, navigating these regions is a bit more labyrinthine, so be on your guard when doing this. At least these aren't going to be as difficult as the Entropy Espers, and we'll see much later. Oh, they're grinders in terms of damage. And here are my arch nemesis returning from the last part, if you saw it. If you didn't see it, to sum up, those things I'm dodging are called evil gazebos, or dread gazebos. They fire a homing ivy ball shot at you, which then will eventually split up into 12 omnidirectional shots on part of splitting. What makes them so dangerous is that it's like a shotgun blast if you hit all 12 pellets at once, and they can almost 3-hit shot you, or one-shot you if you're playing at a high enough difficulty setting. And also the other problem is that you can't hurt them without using spell gems which destroy background objects, or harm background objects, like the original Fire Taunt spell gem, the Ivy Whip, the Ice Cross, etc, etc. And usually they're resistant towards the Earth-type spell gems. But it seems like it's usually the Fire-type spell gems which are the best against them, or Entropy. But when they're bunched into groups, they can be really dangerous and deadly, especially because they home in quite fast. Just collecting some resources for later, though it really isn't necessary at this point, as I figured out later. that out of the way, the Craggy Highlands here is free, as well as the region next to it. Unfortunately, the wind shelter's area of effect wasn't big enough to include the last lieutenant. I'll get back and fix that later. Right now, let's place a wind shelter here, right on this desert. The desert region is kind of mostly flat, and has a desert climate with associated enemies. Quite a bit of fire-type enemies as well as ground-based ones. But like the Craggy Highlands, as well as a certain other environmental area, I won't be exploring it that much on this continent. And and the desert regions tend to have a lot of, I would like to say, Egyptian themed areas. In addition to normal houses, they have quite a bit of pyramids and whatnot. And their houses are more labyrinthine of sorts. The best items here are the water-type spell gems. And sometimes entropy as well. Really though, even these explosive fire-type espers aren't too dangerous as long as you keep your distance away from them. As even if they self-destruct upon destruction, they're rather easy to dispatch due to the slow movement rate. But with that out of the way, the desert region's free. Only 2 more wind shelters left, and this continent will be free enough for me to take on all the other opponents left. Here's a sped up version, as I already went through a Ice Age Plains wind shelter build. Alright, this area has been freed, so now there's only one place left. Right up to the northeast is the Evil Overlord's location, and of course I'll be placing it right next to it so I can access the lieutenant easily. This area is called an abandoned town. I won't be visiting it this much either, but it's not too much of a problem, thankfully. But it tends to have a lot of skelly bots and mech type enemies. So it can be kind of annoying. Like here, all these mechs and whatnot. And of course, things like this can happen where it randomly generated terrain, but it was almost exactly the same as the last room. So, yeah, sometimes the random generation acts a little bit funky. Alright, all the wind shelters have been placed in the world. So now it's finally time to make a stand against the last evil lieutenants. It's time to go after them now. And unfortunately, both of them are located in Evergreen Forests. Now, I took a short break in between this so I can go back to my settlement and restore my health, as those Gargans set me afire and drained my health pretty fast. I didn't want to go after the evil lieutenant with just a third of my health pool left. That's what also makes the Gargans so dangerous. They like to swarm you, like here, but it's only one here, and each of their fireballs, it can set you on fire, unless you're really resistant to being set on fire, like some of the races are. And this fire can quickly drain your health if you're getting barraged by it, especially due to the swarms of them. And they're even more dangerous when we reach their bigger cousins, in the underground regions, usually. So my suggestion for this region is to, or the Evergreen Forests in general, is to take the top route. You will be assaulted by eagles, a lot of bats, and the occasional Gargan or two, but for the most part, you won't take an immense amount of damage. It's mostly a nuisance. And of course, another reason why they're so annoying is that you need usually fire types, or spell gems that are not of earth type, which I don't really have a good one yet. Or now, at least. And eagles are annoying as they quickly come over from one part of the screen and then move back. You can chase them with the Storm Dash, but you better have enough mana so you can actually kill them in one round. Oh, and as I've defeated 2 evil lieutenants, and once I defeat the other 2, they'll become even more a nuisance when they travel to the other regions nearby. Really though, stay on the top, use Storm Dash to get to whatever destination you want, ignore almost everything else. And you should be relatively fine. Evergreen Forests do provide a lot of resources though, in terms of wood, due to all the trees. And I suggest clearing them if you're facing enemies, as enemies can somewhat camouflage themselves with the same tree colors and whatnot. Thankfully though, there was I didn't set any wind shelters in the Evergreen Forest, otherwise I would have to deal with boss level Gargans and whatnot, which would be kind of a nightmare. And of course, due to the way this is set up, usually each room length of Evergreen Forest is quite long, as you can see from the top left minimap, relative to the current stages we've seen before, or environments. Alright, we made it to the evil outpost. And here I decided to use the Transmogrify Bat Scroll. The thing with the Transmogrify Bat Scroll is that even though you take about the same amount of damage as before, your mana regens at about a tenth of what it usually does, approximately. And it also causes other problems as well. But you get to fly everywhere else. And also, make sure you have another Transmogrify Bat Scroll left over, otherwise you will not be able to morph out of bat form. And funny enough, all the enemies I faced in this tower climb upwards, they were all bats as well. So it's really bat versus bat combat here. Really though, all these enemies are kind of a nuisance, so it's easy to skip past them. Unfortunately, Storm Dash doesn't go directly up, it's always left or right, but you can force it to go upwards. But mana is much more of a precious resource in this form, due to the much slower regen rate. But it really makes these tower climbs less of a hassle. Alright, I've made it to the top. Time to transmogrify out of being a bat. Here's the exit portal, just in case you want to leave. And of course, the other thing I forgot to mention is that in bat form, you take 20 times more damage in windstorms. So that I strongly don't suggest turning into bad while in a windstorm or wind shelter mission. Alright, it's time to face the evil lieutenant. This one. This Alternator the Icy Amoeba. Or Giant Blue Amoeba, as I like to call it. Giant Blue Amoebas are water-type monsters. So their weakness tends to be, well, usually, in this case it's entropy, but it's usually air-type. So in this case, I decided to just use the clinging factor to kill him. And as giant blue amoebas are generally very slow, or rather slow, it's like killing a slow esper. So, pretty easy boss fight. We get a niche air enchant, kind of a more epic level. I decided to look over this, and I get something else as well. Just wanted to reorganize my spell gems before leaving. And this boss left over an epic spell, an epic gem. Or an epic orb specifically, which will be very useful for crafting gems, or spell gems in the near future. Time to go after the next evil lieutenant, who is once again in another Evergreen Forest. Oh joy. And the urban mechs have finally moved over to the Evergreen Forest. Even more joy. And we've made it to the next evil outpost. Or I will have once I clear up all these enemies. And yes, as shown in when I was traveling from here to there, a lot more of the mechs have moved in. As such, this tower climb is more difficult as a bat than before. As before, I only needed to care about bats, but now I have to care about all these espers and urban mechs all over the place. And skelebots, of course. Like here, it stormed my way left, so I had to do some improvisation to get past. And of course, I can't really use my spell gems as often as I wanted to, so getting past these enemies is even more of a problem. But thankfully, as I don't take any extra damage as a bat, it's easier to dodge their attacks in a way. So yeah, same old tower climb, just with more careful dodging, of course. Alright, we made it to the top, and now it's time to face off against the next evil lieutenant. Here's the stat check as usual. I may have forgotten to do that in the last one, sorry. So as a level 4 character, it's time to face off against it. And there he is. These types of bosses. Something the gruesome. He is a brimstone cyclone. Yeah, I kind of hate brimstone cyclones as bosses. The main reason is because they pull you in if you're close by, and they fire off mini cyclones at you, which lock onto your position, then explode after a while. They're kind of like the dreaded gazebo's ivy shots, but not a shotgun approach, and you can do quite a bit of damage adding up. And stay away from them, as they can easily mow down your health through contact damage, especially in higher difficulty modes. In this case, it's weak against the water and entropy-based spell gems, so use those. So as such, I'm using Rising Bubbles and Clinging Factor to destroy it. More difficult than the last boss, but once you get the hang of it, it's a cinch. Alright then, now that all the evil lieutenants are down, it's time to use the epic orbs and put them to use, as well as the uncommon orb which I got earlier. What these epic and uncommon orbs do is basically they allow you to apply special effects randomly to certain spell gems. Like in the wild, when you were to collect a spell gem, you would get some random traits, sometimes better, sometimes not so good. By using an uncommon or epic orb, you're able to increase the chances or force a certain spell gem attributes you applied. Like here, now I have a more projectile speed, spell cost is lower, but the sacrifice is that the damage I do is much less, so it actually does less DPS than my previous Ivy Whip. Even though it's a higher level spell gem, the Ivy Whip 6 that is, it does less damage than the Ivy Whip 4 I've been using for the past few parts. So you need to keep that in mind. Even though it may have a lot of good effects, it also may have a very strong negative effect. But using the orbs has a better chance of positive and more effects in general. The other advantage of using these effects is that it will also scale the level of the spell gem up certain levels depending on the rarity of the orb used. Like if I use the epic level orb, I believe that the spell gem will fall up the world's level by about 3 before falling behind. So I don't need to recraft the Ivy Whip for about 3 more levels. And as such, it'll grow in strength with the world. Here I'm showing off what would happen if you're not careful while doing a boss delve. Not too bad, and boom! I got shotgunned by 3 of these Ivy Storms. And here's the larger cousin to the Gargan, the Deep Wolves Gargan. And those 3 or 2 entropy-based enemies. I don't know who released all the shotgun blasts, but it ended my first character's death. As this is saying, truly magnificent that is not a end of the game. It just means that the glyph will be passed on to a new bearer. Unfortunately, what that also means is that if I go back to do that particular mission, that character's ghost will be haunting there and attacking. So always be cautious and be slow while doing boss delves, especially when you increase the difficulty. Those Ivy shotguns are deadly. But anyways, time to randomly pick a new character. As I said before, as I rescued an Industrial Age character, I can now choose from an Industrial Age character from the level character select again. Okay, now that we lost our first glyph bearer and onto our second, it's time to actually decrease the Evil Overlord's level. Now, I could go after the Evil Overlord right now, but the problem is though he's 5 levels higher than my current character, at level 11 specifically, or the world level actually. So what will end up happening is that it'll make the boss battle much tougher. So what you need to do is send your survivors out to attack the Overlord's keep. To do that, you must build up their skill sets as well as their current status or mode. You can upgrade their status or mood by giving them items like apples, teas, etc, etc. And you can upgrade their stats by building the Guardian Power Scrolls to build buildings across the continent which provide them continental bonuses. You can give them books of adventuring or whatever skill sets they are, and by providing it, it'll make them at better shots at decreasing the evil overlord's level, as well as the dispatch missions as well for resources. However, it's also determined by the city building difficulty level set at the beginning of the game. As I set it to district, or whatever the normal level is, the evil overlord will always have 5 levels up, and the max chance of success for the survivors will be 85%, and the max chance of survival is going to be 75%. If I turn down that setting, it'll increase their chances at success and survival, tone down the difficulty, as well as decrease the number of levels the evil overlord will have an advantage of. And of course, it also has some other effects, like in the max mood that each of the survivors can have, and whatnot. So the higher you make it, the more difficult it is to take on the overlords. Like here, I was able to decrease the evil overlord by about 4 levels, but Atiye Van perished in the last fort, so he's 1 level higher than before. So I need to bring up someone else, Melia Maron, who I saved in the last episode, and bring her up to par so she can take off the last level. But going back to the point I was saying, another thing to note is that if you don't balance your characters or survivors' skill sets in terms of moods, and more importantly their skills in their particular professions, other survivors will lose more mood, as they'll feel like the other survivors aren't showing the same amount of burden. So you have to keep that in mind, and the effects are harsher with the increased city building difficulties. So if you want to avoid all the city building eccentricities, balancing and whatnot, just turn down the city building difficulty. Here I sent Emilia Moron off on a suicide mission basically. She succeeded but sadly was killed. So only 2 survivors left in the world, and now it's time to actually defeat the Overlord. So in the next part, I'll be going after the evil overlord and try to free this continent from the shackles of him or her, or it. Thanks for watching, viewers, and have a nice day. Doodles!